to this information, maybe during one of the sugar industry meeting or catch-ups that we've had during the year. So anyway, this is all about highly dispersive sodic soils and their associated constraints to yield. So what we have in here is the trial paddock. Which one is the lace gilly? This one here? Ah, okay. It's like anyway, this is the trial paddock there. That's a yield map. The green areas are showing the high yielding areas, mid yielding areas in yellow, and very low yielding areas in red. So for us to actually set up a trial in there, we didn't want to do like a strip trial all the way across the block. Because of the variability, we would have issues with the data. So we actually set it up in there, and that's pretty much the trial that we've got in a mid-yielding area to see if we could, after understanding what was happening in the soil, which was clearly an imbalance in minerals, and I'll go through that in a minute, to see if we could actually boost the yield potential of that area, or in case we weren't able to boost the yield potential of the mid-yielding areas of that block, we would move on to variable rate application with the grower. So the issue we have in here is sodicity, as I explained before, highly dispersive sodic soils. And these are some of the dispersion tests we carried out from the high-yielding area, the mid-yielding area, and the low-yielding area, A and B. So A represents 0 to 25, and B 40 to 60. Why did we decide on those depths? Well, I normally go and take a soil core down to a meter, and I identify the area where the topsoil actually changes abruptly to the subsoil, which these guys would call the A horizon and the B horizon. Hey, not that bad, but anyway. So after identifying those areas where we wanted to sample from, we did the dispersion tests, and as you can see, the high-yielding area, no dispersion at all, just a bit of milking in there, but that wasn't actually driving any yield losses in that area. That was yielding up to 100 tons to the hectare. Then the lowest yielding area was in the B, or the subsoil. We had a highly dispersive soil. That was in the lowest yielding area, 0 to 25 tons of cane to the hectare. And then in the mid-yielding area, we had a bit of dispersion on the topsoil and highly dispersive on the subsoil. So that's when we said, look, subsoil constraints are also going to have an impact on what we are doing on the top. A quick question just for you guys. How many of us actually stop and think about the subsoil when we are growing or grazing, or, you know, whether it is pasture or cane or legumes or whatever? How many of us think about the subsoil and what might be going on in there? I can tell you from experience that issues that happen down there are actually driving what happens on the topsoil. So anyway, in the region, we normally tend to apply ash to try and fix soda patches, as they are commonly called. And in this instance, the grower was trying to compensate on those lower yielding areas by over-applying a little bit of N, believing that, you know, applying a little bit of N would compensate on that and he would be able to actually grow more. But the truth is, it's got nothing to do with nitrogen. It was all about understanding the mineral imbalance that we had on the subsoil, also with the calcium-magnesium ratio being low, and well, or not in the proportion it should have been for that specific soil type, and the sodium exchangeable percentage just driving up that dispersion and completely blocking roots from accessing, or if they accessed actually rotting. So that was actually what was driving the lower productivity on almost 50% of that paddock. So we set up the trial in there, as I explained before, that little square in there. All those are little plots that we treated with different things that I'll explain as we move into the presentation. And then we did some in-season drone imagery with Marcus. We actually managed to locate where the field trial was within the paddock. That's the 2D image on the right there, like the normal photo that you would get from the drone, and Marcus can actually go more in depth on that. And this one is the NDVI actually showing like the health status of that plant, or how green that plant actually was. And you can see that some of the plots were greener than the others. So as I move on to the presentation after Marcus's slides, I will explain to you a little bit more of what we actually discovered there. But I wanted to introduce how important the drone imagery was for us to start understanding what was happening in there. So now I leave you all with Marcus, who is gonna just talk about the world of drones. Hey. Yes, and the laser. This one or that one?
Roving one. Okay, so I'll just quickly go through who I am and why I'm doing the work that I am doing. So I'm a Senior Development Officer with DAF. My role is supporting farming systems, particularly sustainable farming systems in reef catchments. I'm actually located up in the wet tropics at Innisfail, so I'm actually involved directly with the farming community, and I've been in this role for about 7 years. Okay, I'm going to talk about why I'm in this role, what my background is, particularly with the drone technology, and how we're now combining the drone technology with what we call digital farming systems. And I'm also going to just talk about drone photogrammetry, some of the products that we can get now, and some of the things that are just over the horizon, or maybe just on the horizon at the moment. Okay, I'm in this position basically because I'm in a reef catchment. I'm in an area that has, which we all are here, we're in areas that have high rainfall, and so that means that things that we apply to the landscape here have the potential to be able to move off into the Great Barrier Reef Lagoon. And DAF's working on that problem. So we're tasked with working with the farming community to find ways to not only reduce what's lost from the land, but to find ways of making sure that the crop takes up what we're applying. Okay, I'm just going to run through this video. This gives you a bit of an idea of what I'm doing in a sort of a holistic sense. Now, will this play, or does it need to be clicked to play?
Taking it from managing the farm as a big single unit to reducing it down and managing it as separate small management units. This could be an area of just a few square metres, or it might be an area of a few hundred. My name's Marcus Bulstrode.
With my role in drones and with technology, particularly precision ag, I get to do these talks quite often, and there's always something. No matter how good the crew is, the backup crew with the IT side of it, there's always some little glitch somewhere on the line. As there is with the technology when you're using it in the field, there's always something that doesn't quite work or you need to fix up.
I work for the Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. I'm working with growers to better understand their farm, taking it from managing the farm as a big single unit to reducing it down and managing it as separate small management units. This could be an area of just a few square metres, or it might be an area of a few hundred metres. It's a very exciting time to be in agriculture. New technologies such as drones are providing a whole range of new tools for us to be able to better manage farms. What we actually do with the drone, we'll put the drone up in the air, we'll fly over the crop, that might be at 100 metres or so. The drone is looking down the whole time with its sensor, and it's basically taking high resolution images of the crop. Drones come with a range of sensors these days. The typical one that I would use would be just an RGB, a red, green, blue sensor, so if you like a standard camera. But we also have multispectral cameras and thermal cameras. So we have some very specific sensors that we can tune to identify the character that we're interested in. I then go back to the office and I can process those images and start to unlock where the areas of difference are across the paddock. I've stitched together all of the images, and now I have a single orthomosaic high resolution image of the paddock. If we look over here where there is no vegetation, we actually can't really see much going on at all. What we need is what we have here, where we've got a crop. Suddenly we can see all sorts of variability, and it's the crop that actually shows us the difference in the growing conditions, and that's a very important aspect of it. Ideally, the crop needs to be a bit over 1 metre high. I need to get enough leaf matter to be able to be seen by the drone clearly above it. In some cases, it's much easier to visualise the problem that we have using a 3D model, but I can zoom in and have a look around to see, okay, what did it actually look like on the ground? What was the effect that the growing conditions were having on the cane? In a 3D perspective, it's actually very easy to see the difference in the growing conditions. I can see the area that I'm particularly interested in. If we look back up here, another area where it's doing very poorly compared to relatively even the rest of the block. So I can zoom right in on that area and have a much closer look to see, yep, that's very poor cane through here. There's all sorts of weeds that have dried off. That's the area that I want to be able to go back into that paddock and see what's going on. I can run it through a couple of different algorithms here, a colour-coded elevation model of the paddock, blue being low, red being high, and we can see that this strip where the cane is not doing well is lower and much more open. So this is exactly the sort of area that I would then go into the paddock and start trying to work out why, and can I actually change that zone to make it better for the sugarcane. What I can do is take a marker, put that marker into this image. That marker is now a geo-referenced point that I can go back to with another device such as an iPad. I can walk back into this paddock and stand at that precise point and know that I'm in the middle of the area that I'm concerned about and start to do some analysis to work out, okay, how can I fix it? And this is exactly the sort of thing that I would say to myself, I need to do some soil sampling, some testing of that area to see why is the cane not doing well. So using the drone mapping, I've been able to identify a part in the paddock where the cane was not doing well. I've extracted a soil core from this zone. I'll be able to analyse this soil core and start to understand what the limiting conditions may be for crop growth. Up here where the crop's growing, we've got roots, got organic matter, things that we need to have. We start to get a colour change as we come down through the soil profile. We've got now an absence of roots. There's nothing growing down into this part of the soil. And then when we get right down here, we've actually got, that's virtually beach sand. There's just nothing there at all. No clay, no organic matter, so not a good growing medium and something that would be needing to be treated to be able to grow cane properly. And in many cases, I should be able to improve this area to make the crop grow better. Remember that previously this paddock would be managed as one unit. It gets the same fertiliser, the same cultivation, everything is put on identically across the whole paddock. And yet we know that there's actually different growing zones. Some areas grow better cane, some areas grow poorer cane. Utilising the drone technology, we're able to target those areas of difference. We can then start to manage them separately. So for example, with this farm here, we're actually trialling some different techniques to improve the soil in those poor growing areas. We're going to actually add some organic matter and some clay and see whether we can increase the water holding capacity and also the nutrient holding capacity of these soils. The great thing with drone technology is it provides the base maps for other precision equipment. For example, variable rate fertiliser boxes, and what they require is relevant mapping products that can go into the tractor. We've got a smart implement on the back of the machine and it can alter its fertiliser rate within the paddock as it's going along. So the best outcome is for the crop to take up the nutrients that we're applying. We don't want nutrients leaving the paddock. The grower doesn't want nutrients leaving the paddock heading out to the Great Barrier Reef. We want the crop to use them and to grow a large crop. The same thing applies to weed management, that typically across a paddock we've got areas that produce more weeds and some areas that might produce fewer weeds. So if we're putting out herbicide, we might want to put it out particularly targeting those zones of high weed load, whereas the areas that don't have weeds, we might say to ourselves, well, I don't need to put any herbicide out. There are significant efficiency gains for both the grower and also for the natural environment. The other great thing with the drone mapping is that we can compare it to other mapping systems. For example, EMI, which is electromagnetic induction, where we actually can measure the differences in the soil properties. We can now compare that to the crop yield above those soil differences and to see how well they match together. There are many uses for drone mapping for precision agriculture. One example here is flow mapping. We can actually create the surface water flow model for the land that we're interested in. So that means that we can design drainage networks, all sorts of other earthworks based around the drone mapping. In the near future, I think some of the biggest developments are going to be in AI, so artificial intelligence. For example, automated weed recognition, where I can fly the paddock, put the data set through an AI program, and it will automatically find the character that I'm interested in. It might be a particular weed, and it will identify how much of the weed is in the paddock and whereabouts it is located. The great thing with drone technology is that it is actually accessible to growers. The machines are quite advanced, quite technical, but they've reached the point that they're almost consumer level these days. So a grower can go out, buy a machine, get a bit of advice on what he may want to be doing with the mapping side of things, but basically a grower can go out and do his own crop mapping and then engage with an agronomist or an advisor to understand those different zones.
Okay, so what I'm really trying to introduce... It's gone there. Okay, so what I'm really trying to introduce is this concept of precision ag, something that many of you will already be doing, understanding those zones of difference and then working out either adapting the inputs to match those zones or working on trying to improve those zones. I'll jump through some of this stuff on the drone stuff just so that we can fit it all in. So just to give you a bit of an idea of what my office looks like these days, I'm really about spatial mapping. That's really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to bring in these different mapping products to understand the level of variability and then how we can deal with those different variabilities. Okay, so a normal thing for me, put a drone up, get the images back and create a set of mapping products. Typically there's 4 mapping products that come out of a single flight. They will be the ortho mosaic, which you've already seen, which is this super high resolution RGB image of the area that we're interested in. There's the one where I can run it through an algorithm to highlight those zones of difference. There's a digital surface model, which helps me with understanding the hydrology of that particular farm. And there's also a full 3D product, which you saw in the video, that I can move around. I won't go into this one. Now, I've been doing it for quite a few years now, and what has just jumped out at me has been the level of variability. So I go to cane farmers, or it can be other crops as well, but I go to the farmer's property and they say, yeah, there's a little bit of something going on somewhere on one of the blocks. But when I fly them, it's just everything's variable. There is so much difference going on, and particularly down in these sort of coastal alluvial systems where you've got all sorts of interactions and blending of soils. Okay, so here's a block that we can see some significant variability on. Here's just showing you some different products, the ortho, the plant health, a surface model, and also thermal mapping to see the stressed part of the crop once water becomes a restrictor. Okay, so it's great. The drone is the tool to be able to find those zones, but we need to go in on the ground and work out what's going on. We can bring in other mapping products. For instance, we're going to bring in our soil maps. We might even look at some satellite data. So there's other mapping products, but in the end, it's boots on the ground. We've got to go in there and we've got to try and work out what's going on. And there are many reasons that there can be a difference in the growing zones. It can be to do with the soil types. It can be to do with the hydrology. It can be to do with irrigation. Here's a centre pivot that's showing all sorts of variability across the zones that it's irrigating. It can be due to weed pressure. It can be due to pests. Here we're looking at cane grubs and the damage they can do. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on that can cause it. I'm going to jump the weed a little bit. And we also have those other products that we can do on the mapping side of it. You saw the EMI mapping, which some groups are doing, as well as the Department of Resources. And we've done some dual flights now where we do the EM mapping and then we also look at the crop variability on top. And it's interesting to see how well those two systems link together. That's some EMI mapping with a heat map to show the difference across a farm. What I will say is that crops don't necessarily react adversely to changes in those property boundaries of the soil. So it's a fantastic tool to look at perhaps after you've got the crop variability to maybe help unlock the difference, but they're not necessarily linked together. The crop is the one that you really want to know where the variability is. Okay, we can stick it into smart tractors. I'm just going to go very quickly. I think we're running fairly low on time, but I've got a big trial running at the moment, which I'm calling a yield constraints identification and mitigation trial, and that's come about after all these years of mapping the variability across farms. So we've joined together those things and said, if I can map it, I can get on the ground, let's work out how we can actually deal with it and change the conditions the crop's growing in. And of course, if we can't change the conditions or it's not economically viable to change the growing conditions, then we can reduce the inputs in that zone. But it's pointless, as Dan showed on that nitrogen one, and a lot of growers in our area certainly throw more nitrogen on thinking that they can change the system to grow more crop, but that's not what's holding the crop back. If we look at the barrel example, plenty of nitrogen, we've got the other constraints that we have to deal with first. Oh, that's a video. Okay, so we've gone in and I've gone in and found those zones of difference, and then we've ended up coming to an agreement with the grower so that we could go in and actually make some, in some cases, some fairly radical changes to the way the soils are within the farm. One of the first things is to do lots and lots of soil testing to really try and understand what we've got under the ground if we're looking at it from the soil side of things. If we're saying that soil is the potential constraint, then we do lots of testing to make sure that we're working on good information. Jumped a little bit there. Okay, so we also dug lots of holes. So soils, if you just go and take a few cores, you get some idea of it. But in the end, if you can dig a big hole and have a really good look at it, you get a much better idea of what's going on. So here are some of the pits that we did to try and work out some of that variability to see whether we could see the reason for it occurring. And then we actually got in with machines, and I think, I'm going to risk jumping this, I don't think I will. Oh yeah, here we go. We got some machines in and dug the features up. Where I'm from, there's a very significant feature across the Tully Valley, and they're these sand features which are potentially paleo channels, so old channels, watercourses that moved across the landscape, and they've now been backfilled with sand. And so when you look at a standard block, might have reasonable soil on it, but when you get to one of these sand features, these are not ridges, these are filled channels, it's basically sand. And so you can see the scale of what we've done. We've basically dug it out, and then on the side of it we can see mill mud and ash that we're about to put back into that feature to fundamentally change the characteristics of it. Here's just some more digging that we did around the place, digging them out. And in this case, the grower also needed to clear the drains on his property, so we dug out all of the drains and we put that material back in, mixed it up, and put it back into the features that we had dug out. part of digging it out to that degree is that we really wanted to understand that feature. We didn't want to just take a few points and make some big assumption. We wanted to dig the thing out and really understand what it was made of. This is the second farm that I'm working on, and in this farm, instead of digging the whole feature out, because we felt that we had a good understanding of what the constraints were, we did 17 separate pits or treatment points across the feature, and then did a range of ameliorant changes within those zones. That's the drain clearing. Don't quite know why that one's there. Yeah, so what we did in the second trial, we brought in a whole lot of things as well. So we brought in some high clay tent soil to be able to add to the mill mud and ash, and also some of the sand that we pulled out of the feature. The sand was actually quite useful, certainly in this part of the world where drainage is a real issue. We wanted some sand in it. We didn't want to turn it into some sort of impermeable layer. So we mixed it all up, and then we basically filled back up those 17 trenches with the product that we had mixed up on the other end of the block. And this is the state that the blocks are in at the moment. They've both been planted, and the features are all now hidden underneath some very early plant cane, and we'll be tracking them over the next few years to see what those changes in conditions have made to the crop. All right, Dan, wherever Dan's gone. Where's Dan? And, oh yes, this is just very quickly, this is yesterday, Ken and Mary's place. They wouldn't have seen this, I only got done this morning. So just a quick mapping exercise on Ken and Mary's farm for tomorrow. We can see a variability map, and we can also see a drainage map. This is a digital surface model that's created by the system. And this is just on there, that mango block at the top there, Ken, that got the soil samples from yesterday, just shows the variability in the growth rate of those mango trees. Great. Dan, I'll just get you to yours, which I think is coming up. Sorry about all these others. And Dan.
Me again. Anyway, so now you guys understand what Marcus is all about and the key role he played in actually getting the drone imagery and understanding variability within this paddock. So that's the sort of overlay trial design in there. We had different treatments. We treated with ash, with lime, ash, gypsum, danda, and we had some plots as control, so fully randomized and replicated trial. And what I was actually hoping to show you guys was this. So from Marcus's drone imagery, I started thinking, well, yeah, I can see those plots in there, but how can I get, better use of this drone imagery? So I started identifying the plots in there, and actually I just came up with an idea. I said, well, I'm just gonna give them a score from 1 to 5, depending on their health status or status. 1 would be if it is completely red, so something like that, but we didn't have any plots like that. 2 would be, you can see them here a little bit better, unhealthy or very poor. A score of 3 for poor health, like half red, half green. 4 would be good health, and 5 would be like the darkest green. So like very healthy plant from the plant health imagery. So after doing that analysis, just quickly the plots that came up showing like a healthier status were the ones that we treated with ash, with an average score of 4.75. I didn't use any of these to drive any conclusions, but it was just, another observation that I was actually able to come up with after Marcus flew it with the drone and, gave me more ideas. So I just thought it was useful. And then we sort of proceeded to harvest the plots every year to try and, sort of show that the health status that they were showing from the drone imagery could actually relate to how productive that plot was going to be. So just very quickly, for 2019, 2020, and 2021, The plot that we treated with ash actually showed the better productivity in that area. We got a really good response from lime as well, because the pH on most of the plots was actually around the 5.5. So we expected a really good response on that. The other treatments actually, well, the gypsum didn't actually show. It was pretty average, like very similar to the control. And the danda, we actually expected it to have a better impact because of its high content of readily decomposable organic matter, but we didn't see like a big improvement from the control to the danda, like in all years across the plots. So the ash one was actually the one that actually showed the better results in 2021, 20, and 19. Very quickly, I couldn't add any of the physical or chemical data that we've seen across all years from the soil sampling that I've been performing on these plots, because I knew Mr. Marcus was going to take a little bit, long on this, and I wasn't going to be able to go in depth with all that. But if you guys are interested, I'm always keen to share that data with you all and discuss some of the changes. So in terms of the chemical properties, the most significant change on pH from 5.1 to 7.1 from the ash. The substantially reduced subsoil ESP. So I think from memory, levels were around the 25 to 35, so very high solidity down there, and we actually managed to reduce them substantially. One that I forgot to add might be one of the physical properties, so I'll tell you that one later. The most significant change on organic carbon from 0.56 to 0.96. In terms of physical properties, we had a clay percentage increase, and therefore, we improved the CEC, or the cation exchange capacity of that soil that was treated with the ash. The soil texture and structure. In terms of soil texture, we managed to drive down the bulk density. That was around 1.83. I don't remember if I added that on the first slide when I showed you the graph, but we know that a higher bulk density from 1.6 actually don't allow or doesn't allow roots to penetrate, so we were actually able to drive down that bulk density and allow roots to penetrate. And then the soil permeability was improved thanks to the high silicon content in the ash. So that's just the results fairly quickly in there. If you guys have any questions, or if, as I said before, if you guys want to go through that data more in a specific, I'm always happy to share it and discuss it and look at that more in depth. But I think that's pretty much it. So thanks very much. The ash comes from the mill, so it is a mill byproduct that we use. So as byproducts that we used on that trial, we got the danda and the ash. So yeah, it was actually applied at a very high rate. So we will go through the economics of that because all we want to do is put in place an economically savvy sort of management strategy for the grower. We don't want to go and tell him, look, you got to spend all this much money trying to sort this out. So we'll do the economics, and if it's not like economically wise for the grower to put it in place, we'll move on to variable rate application program. Or we also want to put in place, sustainable management practices that actually provide a sustainable solution that we can keep for long, not just, a Band-Aid solution as we emphasized before.
I was just wondering, with the drones, can they pick up a difference between a regenerative farming system and a normal chemical-based farming system?
I can just talk loud, I think. Everyone can hear me? No? Oh, you can. Yeah. That's a complex question. I would think that if we did treatments and there was a difference between the treatments, we would be able to assess it. But if I flew 2 blocks of cane, for example, I wouldn't be able to tell whether one was perhaps in that regenerative state. It may come up, You know, what I'm saying is if there is some plant response to the particular activity you're doing, then the drone will certainly assess that. So yes, but in your specific example, I would have to fly it.
Without spending all that money that research.
So yes, really any treatment that you do that increases the yield or the health of the crop, the drone will pick that up. The drone system will pick that up, and it's measurable.
Maybe a question for Mr. Gwynn. Do you reckon ash could be considered as a biological input? Okay. Okay. That's okay. Sorry, I'll come back to you. Ladies first. Hey, yeah.
Just a question for Marcus. So I see that the project that he's working on is valuable for advancing science and all of that side of it. But has he done any economic studies about how valuable it would be to dig up a soil feature like he's discovered in that particular on that cane farm? Would the economics ever justify a grower actually doing that?
Yes. No, yes? Yes. So that will be an eventual outcome from the trial, will be to look at the economics of it. Really at this stage where, as you can see by the first trial where we dug up the whole feature, we're really wanting to understand exactly what the features are first and then keep tapering down. So the next iteration of this trial is going to be actually to put a slot, just a really narrow slot, maybe 20 centimetres wide through the feature at the point where we're putting the cane in. So all the time we're going to be making it more and more simple, less and less energy involved or expense in putting those ameliorants in. And of course the flip side of it from the economic point of view is, had the grower, and that particular farm that both those farms that we're working on, they've been had cane on them now for about 80 years. And those features are still there. They've had 80 years of cultivation, all of the inputs, mill mud, mill ash for all those years. The features are still there and grow about 1/3 of the cane. So they've had a lot of inputs wasted on them up until now. So what the process is to say, for how much effort could we lift them to the rest of the block, or do we say it's not economically viable, so do the zonal application, do the variable rate and put less on in those zones and save yourself the money, don't just waste it.
Any further questions for Daniel or Marcus? Yes, up the back.
Yeah, so the trial that you guys done there, I can see that you have the lime dash, the gypsum dunder, and the control. So did you put a lime in every single block, or did you put a lime in like only those specific plots? And no other fertilizer put it there? Right. Okay, so so you had the blocks then with lime fertilizer, ash fertilizer, gypsum fertilizer. That's how actually it was done.
Yeah. So every plot was treated. Do you want to go back on the trial inside? Did you get any photos?
Yeah, I had a photo of this.
Yeah, that's just the graph.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll go back on.
Okay, cool. Thank you, mate.
So let's go back. So that's the plot in there, right? So this one would be rep 1, number 1. So number 1 is lime. So that plot there would have been treated with lime. That's what I mean. This one, rep 2, number 3, that would be rep 2 treated with gypsum. Rep 3, number 4, that plot there would have been treated with dunder. Rep 4, number one, that would have been treated with lime. So those were the ameliorant treatments that we applied to each plot to treat the sodicity.
Okay, so just one last question. And so all the blocks would need either lime or either gypsum, or only those blocks that I saw? You done a soil test for each of the blocks, or for the whole thing, and then you just split in lots?
Now, we have indeed soil sampled each little plot, but they all are within, well, to go back to that photo, it'll be a bit of an effort. Maybe if I'll just do it quickly here. So all those plots were within the mid-yielding area on that image I showed you at the beginning. So this one here. Sorry, Gilly. Gilly's gonna kill me, hey? Okay, so that's the mid-yielding area there, the yellow one. That's where we actually fit the trial, all the randomized little plots. So this little square, that's the same square that I showed you just before with all the treatments and the plots. So they all were within the mid-yielding area where we identified the sodic issue, as you can see in here. So all those plots, excepting, you know, maybe the little corner on top of these plots, had the same issue. So we fertilized them, but we treated sodicity different within each of the plots. Not to have a strip replicated trial across the whole paddock to avoid, you know, the data just doing ups and downs and you playing with those numbers, because that's actually one of the things that I wanted to highlight. So thank you for taking me back to this. To set up a trial, a strip trial across the whole paddock, just imagine the variability on that data if we are just collecting data from such high variable strips. Like we would have a strip in here going through a highly productive area, a mid sort of yielding area, and then a low spot. So that's gonna create, you know, differences in the data, and it'll be pretty hard to tell what's going on. So we actually just set it up within the area that we want to ameliorate. So the lowest yielding area is just maybe, what, 10% of the paddock, whereas the mid-yielding area was sort of 50% or 40% of that paddock. Does that answer any of your questions, Pat?
Yeah.
Anything else you want me to clarify? You look like, so just shoot.
Are you sure? No, it's like because it's the same poor area. I understand that, and that actually is the perfect way to do the trial. So I'm just actually curious why in the same area that's a poor production, why only few plots actually need lime?
Oh, well, that's because we wanted to fit within, well, I would have to go back all the way through to the trial design, but we, you know, you count your treatments or your options, and you just, for example, in that case, we had 5 treatments, and to be sort of scientifically viable or robust, you have to have at least 3 or 4 replications. So you multiply 5 by 4, that's 20. We got 20 plots in there. So that's why we did just, you know, completely randomized, replicated. So as you saw, we didn't have all these 4 treated with lime, these 4 treated with ash, these 4 treated with gypsum. They were just randomized across that same little plot area. So that's why.
Okay, thank you.
That's okay, my bad.
Just as an observation, Daniel.
Yes?
I probably don't need it. Okay. Just as an observation, Daniel, you've identified, and I think you said you gave an actual figure earlier in your presentation of the number of hectares you think of sodicity affected across the district.
Yeah.
Well, it seemed like a rather large number, and if treating it with mill ash is the best outcome, your problem's going to be that you just won't have enough mill ash. You're not even going to touch the sides of the district to try and treat that problem, unfortunately. So we probably need a second best option.
Yes.
And yeah, work with something that we, mill ash can only go so far.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough, Simon. Look, to try and complement that comment of yours, what I normally do is I also soil sample and I send the sample for particle size analysis. So for us to be able to extrapolate a management practice from this soil type to maybe that soil type, I need to understand, the main differences between those soil types. So by no means I'm saying that this is the way to treat. So it did work in this case. So if, let's say, you have solidity issues and I go on sample and I do my particle size analysis and I end up realizing that you have the proportion of clay, sand, and silt maybe similar to this, well, maybe we can then say, oh, well, let's trial it here and see if it has the same sort of impact. But yeah, by no means this is the way to treat it across the whole district. And yeah, I know it is hard work maybe to establish field trials across the entire district and try and work out what the best alternative is, but at least for this grower, we can then decide, well, we're actually now moving on to treating the entire paddock with variable rate application of ash on those yellow areas after we harvested the crop. And we'll see how he goes, checking on his historic yields after we treat the paddock with the ash. So for this grow, at least, there's a management alternative in there. We'll put all the numbers and the economics behind it, and he'll have another option. So he'll go and do that balancing act where he decides, well, I might, want to invest in this because I'm seeing the improvement in the physical and chemical properties of my soil. I'm seeing the improvement in productivity, and I want to do it, or maybe I'll just move into variable rate application and just cut my inputs a little bit on those low yielding areas. But yeah, thank you.
One last thing, I was just wondering what your feeling is on how long that treatment might work for.
Yeah, so we've seen the changes in the physical and chemical properties of that soil. We've seen the buildup in calcium and the change in the calcium-magnesium ratio. We've seen that big drop in the ESP. We've seen that high increase in the pH. But look, being in an area or in a region with, I think, one of the most variable weather patterns in Australia, I think, well, extreme weather events like rains and all that is going to have a big effect on the ability of the soil to actually hold to those properties. But maybe Mark could help me answering any of that. Like, is it likely that when you change the physical and chemical properties of a soil with that kind of ameliorants, how likely is that soil to, preserve those changes in the long term? If you have any clues, or Dan, maybe you, Dan, any ideas?
It's actually quite surprising you saw some of the big changes you did over that short period of time, because cation exchange capacity is one of those things that is quite difficult to shift quickly. So the fact that you shifted it quickly could mean, and I'm only guessing here, that perhaps, I really don't know. I don't know how long it'll last, but it's interesting, and I'm hoping, are you thinking to continue to revisit that site in 5 years' time or something? But,
anyway, Simon, that was my best try, and I did try to put Mark on the spot, but anyway. So, look, we'll see. That's why I've been doing, like regular soil testing, tracking, and this takes me back to the Galaxy mode, and when I told you guys how important the soil testing is and the leaf testing. So I've been able to gather enough data to keep track of those changes. And look, we've seen an improvement, but yeah, I'll keep revisiting that site. Everything is geo-referenced, so maybe in a couple of years' time, I'll be able to say, look, we achieved that change, but after the 4th year, it went down, so it might not be a sustainable alternative, and the grower has decided just to cut his fertilizer inputs. And yeah, but we're yet to see. Sorry, Mike, you had one question at the back there for so long that no one sort of gave you. Yeah, you. Yeah. Thank you, Gilly.
This is the last question, by the way. Just cut you off.
Just a quick one with your data set there, the graph that you showed.
Yes.
Can you just highlight was there a relative increase in the productivity? Like proportionate to the green chart? Like
we did see an improvement in the productivity. The actual treatment with ash was the one that showed.
Yeah, so is it sort of proportionate to the effort applied?
Well, if we have a look at the numbers, I think, and when we finalize all the economics, I would be able to tell you if it is actually viable to actually go through all that effort. But look, in this trial, we're not digging that big trench that Mr. Marcus was doing. So the ash was actually applied, broadcasted on the top of the each plot, and then we just till it, and we tried to incorporate it a little bit. So it wasn't really a big effort. And for the next stage of the trial, when we go through and apply all the ash on variable rate on that paddock, I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue. We don't have the capability to actually create like a prescription map and